In the history of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, she is the only woman who has been put in twice. But there's one question that no award has ever replied to. How much does it really cost to make a legend? The world saw the woman in the black chiffon, whose voice could break a stranger's heart, and who seemed to be on a slightly different frequency than everyone else. The world didn't see the Los Angeles apartment that was so small that the knees were on someone else's floor. Did the years spent in a drug fog slowly kill the singer-songwriter inside her while she kept showing up, smiling, and spinning? 5 people were falling apart at the same time while one of the best-selling records of all time was being made. She worked hard to stay sober, but there was a new trap waiting for her behind it. This one was given to me by a doctor. Behind the woman, the world changed into a story. There was a girl who learned to sing before she could read. She struggled for many years with the weight of her own voice. What really happens when you build a huge kingdom but don't feel like you belong there? Who was Stevie Nicks before everyone else knew who she was? And how can someone lose everything, love, friends, and years of their own mind, and still choose to walk out on that stage over and over again? In order to answer that, we need to go back to the beginning, before Fleetwood Mac and the fame. To an always moving family and a 4-year-old who already carried something the world wouldn't understand for decades. Stephanie Lynn Nicks was born in Phoenix, Arizona, on May 26, 1948. But her family moved around a lot, so the word home didn't really mean a place. Her father, Jess, was a driven business leader whose goals took the family from one state to another all the time. From Phoenix to El Paso, from El Paso to San Francisco, and from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Stevie had been to more colleges than most kids do in their whole childhood by the time they were in high school. She could never have roots because they were a luxury. But even though they were restless, one thing never moved. Her voice. Aaron Jess, her grandpa, called Nicks, a country singer who had a hard time making it and spent his whole life trying to reach a dream that the business never gave him, heard something amazing in his granddaughter for the first time. When she was only 4 years old, he sat next to her and gave her a small harp. He taught her how to feel music before she could understand it. They sang songs together in the kitchen at midnight, when everyone else was asleep, and in the car on long trips. He not only gave her songs, but also a sense of who she was. She knew from a very young age that her voice was more than just a sound. That's what she was. When Stevie's parents gently suggested that Aaron might be pushing the child too far and that they should look at a more practical road, Stevie's grandfather refused to give up. She has something, he said over and over. Anyone took her gift before she was old enough to fight for it herself, and she said, don't take it from her. Before she believed in herself, she would need someone to believe in her again and again. When Stevie's family moved to Arcadia, California, when she was in high school, she had already made a private choice that she couldn't change. She would sing as her life, the only life that was worth living. It wasn't a hobby or a fun thing to do in her spare time. While her classmates planned their college and job paths, she wrote songs in notebooks and studied Janis Joplin and Joan Baez like they were learning a holy language, taking in every note as if it were the only way her future would be possible. She thought it did, so it did. She met the person who would become the love of her life and the biggest problem for 10 years at Arcadia High School. Elaine C. Buckingham was thin, intense, and musically talented in a way that was almost disturbing. He was also completely sure of how brilliant he was. They felt powerless as they were drawn to each other, like two people who see something important in a stranger, the loneliness of someone who hears the world differently than everyone else. They played music together before they knew each other very well. This is how I found out that their sounds fit together in a way that felt less like practice and more like fate. His guitar and her voice together made something that neither of them could have made on their own. There was music and romance, and from the start, they were dangerously involved in ways that neither of them fully understood. In the late 1960s, they moved to San Francisco together, drawn to the city's electric potential as it quickly became the center of the music world. It turned out that the world and art were not ready for them. People who were also dreaming were packed into the clubs. The record companies didn't care. There was less of the beautiful chaos of the summer of love and more of something darker and more commercial. And two sincere young artists from the Los Angeles suburbs were not what anyone was looking for. They kept going. They played together as the Buckingham Knicks and went to any game that was open. College bars, small places, and parties where the host cared more about the drinks than the music. In 1973, they made an album called Self-Titled. A group of songs that can be listened to today show how much talent there was already out there and how little the industry was willing to recognize it. Polydor Records took the record off the market before it hit a lot of people. The label didn't even try to run a marketing effort. This thing just disappeared, taking with it any energy they had built. In fact, the years that followed were not happy. In the way that only long-term failure can, they were painful, embarrassing, and draining. Stevie worked as a waitress in Los Angeles at a place called Clementine's. She got up early to serve coffee to people she had never met and who never looked at her face. She did housework. She cleaned the floors of people's homes while on her hands and knees. These people had lived the kind of life she was starting to worry she would never have. At age 25, she worked as a cleaner and wrote songs in the small bits of time she had left over after her jobs were over. She would sit alone in the small room she shared with Lindsay some nights and let herself feel everything. The difference between what she thought about herself and what other people saw of her. Those nights were not calm. They were the kind that cut people up from the inside out. She can either break something for good or make it so hard that it can't be broken. Lindsay became less stable as she dealt with loss and money problems. The connection that began in music became tense all the time. His anger was directed both inward and outward, and her patience was wearing thin because her goals had to be put off. They fought, made up, and then made music that was better for the fight, which made everything more confusing. It was impossible to separate pain from love and creation, and neither of them knew how much that pattern would cost them yet. Then, in late 1974, they got a call that would change everything. Mick Fleetwood is the drummer for the British rock band Fleetwood Mac. He heard the Buckingham Nicks album in a recording room and was blown away by it. His friend Lindsay was a guitarist, so he called her. Lindsay didn't want to leave Stevie behind, so she made a quiet statement that would change the course of their lives. "Do you want both of us or neither?" Mick said yes. Stevie Nicks was 26 years old and cleaning floors in Los Angeles when the door she had been banging on for 10 years finally opened. Not slowly or with a lot of pomp, but totally. She went through it. The band that Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joined in late 1974 was not the one that everyone would know. Fleetwood Mac was already 10 years old, had been hurt, and had the tiredness of a group that had been through so many changes that it had almost forgotten what it looked like in the beginning. The band was started in London in 1967 by guitarist Peter Green. Their founder had a terrible mental breakdown and died soon after. You went through members so quickly it was scary, and when you got to Los Angeles in the early 1970s, you had a reputation for being very unstable. The band was held together by Mick Fleetwood and John McVie on bass. The rhythm section had been there through it all, even when the woman who had studied them for a short time left the band. That woman was pianist and singer Christine Perfect, who later married John McVie and joined the band as Christine McVie. By the time Stevie and Lindsay joined, the band was made up of hurt survivors who stuck together out of habit and a strong will not to stop. What came next did not happen slowly. It was a volcano. When Stevie's voice and Lindsay's guitar were added to the band, they changed the sound so quickly that even the people in the band were surprised. When it came out in 1975, their self-titled record went straight to #1 on the Billboard charts and stayed there for a whole year. After the fact, Stevie said that songs like Rian come to her in 10 minutes, as if they were sent from outside her. Let the world know about a new kind of rock girl. There was something older, different, and stronger than either of them that wasn't harsh or weak. Stevie Nicks became one of the most famous people in pop music almost overnight. The voice that ranged from a whisper to a wail and spun around with ease were all disturbing. People didn't just enjoy her, they were mesmerized by her. Women saw something in her that they had never seen before on a rock stage, a woman who didn't back down from her power and who seemed to be on a slightly different frequency than everyone else. The stage always hides the wreckage behind the scenes, though. By 1976, every member of Fleetwood Mac's personal lives were falling apart at the same time. The McVies were getting a divorce after 8 years of marriage. Mick Fleetwood would have found out that his wife was cheating on him with his best friend while Stevie and Lindsay's voices were helping the band find its new sound. But the couple's voices were slowly falling apart, like lovers who have tried everything to keep their love alive but have failed. It was never easy to be with them. Lindsay was very intense, which made him a great performer but also a tough partner. In the classroom, she was strict, but when they were alone, she was unpredictable and cruel in a way that left marks long after the words were gone. Stevie had put their shared dream ahead of her own needs for years. Now she was starting to realize that the dream had come true, but it hadn't brought her the peace she thought it would. Even though she broke up with him, she didn't quit the band. She chose to work close to a man she had loved and lost and to stand next to him on stages in front of millions of people while the wound was still open. It was either the greatest or the most painful thing she had ever done. Most likely both. Lindsay never really got over it. He would say, decades later, with the raw honesty of a man still carrying the weight, that losing Stevie was the most important event in his life. For Stevie, the end of their relationship did not make her feel better. It made me feel alone in a different way, like when someone has to smile next to the person they are mourning. Still, the band spread stories from that mess. Rumors is one of the most interesting records in the history of popular music. It was recorded in 1976 and came out in February 1977. Why? Not because it's perfectly perfect, though it is. Why? Because of how much it cost the people who made it. Each song on that record was written during a rough time in the artist's life. Christine McVie talked about how her marriage ending. Lindsay wrote about Stevie and Stevie dying. He wrote Dreams, The Chain, Gold, and Dust Woman. After many years, the second song became the most played classic rock song in Spotify's history. While Sly was recording, Dreams was written in a side room in less than an hour. Young Stevie made a song about the end of love while sitting alone with a piano and headphones. It was very well written, like someone had been thinking about it for a long time. She sang that thunder only happens when it rains. People love you only when they're playing. Simple lines that sounded like old wives' tales. With lines that were so true, it was like confessing. Over 40 million copies of the record were sold around the world. Before it got the Grammy for Album of the Year in 1978, it was #1 on the Billboard charts for 31 weeks. As is often the case with celebrities, fame made each member of Fleetwood Mac very rich, but it didn't make any of them happy because they had to live in pain every day to make reports. The studio sessions went 16 hours. There were a lot of fights between Stevie and Lindsay. There were fights in the control room that spread to the hallways. Engineers and directors were told to be quiet because they were seeing something private and raw that they didn't want to disturb. Lindsay's sadness had turned into something harder in some places. People who were there would remember times when the way he treated Stevie went too far and had nothing to do with music. Stevie got through it. She came every day. She sang so beautifully that it broke my heart.